Now it's time for Perspective, and it's about trying to provide a better quality of life for all in an urbanising world. Now that is the mission of the UN's Human Settlements Programme, or UN Habitat, which aims to promote socially and environmentally sustainable towns and cities. It's a kind of focal point, if you like, for all human settlements. The organisation working in 90 different countries already to promote transformative change. And with me today is Anacláudia Rossbach, who's the organisation's Executive Director. She's here in Paris, taking part in a conference at Sciences Po University, right as the organisation is aiming as well to set up a centre of excellence here in Paris. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us on the programme today. You're appointed by the UN to this job just over a year ago. Just tell us what it is. What is UN Habitat, if you like?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, UN Habitat was created 50 years ago to deal with challenges such as, at the time, the international shelter crisis, but also make sure that countries have some support in proceeding with urbanization processes. Make sure that cities develop in a way that is sustainable, that is inclusive, that makes sense, to the big challenges of the planet. And we are now facing a global housing crisis. So right now, the role of UN Habitat became even more relevant. As you know, we are facing historical affordability gaps in the world. So right now, young families, they don't have money to buy a house. They cannot afford to pay rents. This is everywhere. This is happening here in Europe. This is happening in the global south. But we face a structural inequalities. We still have more than 1 billion people living in slums, in informal settlements. Can you imagine? So we cannot afford to have another pandemic and still having people that cannot access water or cannot stay at home because they are overcrowded, right? We have more than 300 million people living in homeless situation, and we are losing houses. Yeah. We're losing houses through the conflicts. We are losing houses through the climate events, floods, fires, landslides, you name it.
So bearing in mind all those difficulties you've said, and you said UN Habitat's been around for 50 years, what have we been getting wrong? I mean, why has UN Habitat not been able to do more to get things right?
Yeah, I think it was an evolution, right? So the organization grew in this last 50 years. I think we learned a lot. We learned that it's important that we build houses right. So we cannot just build anywhere. It's important that we look at land, for example, that we recognize the social, the ecological function of land. So the connection with how we plan cities and the role of local governments in that process is critical. So we also recognize that we have to build in harmony with the environment. We have to respect what's happening in terms of climate globally. And if you look at housing, it's a key driver of urban sprawl. We are growing more in territory than in population right now. So this is a lesson that we learn. And we learn that we have to plan for the people, right? And really looking at how housing is located within the services, within the opportunities, the jobs, how it's integrated to the urban transportation and so on. So, this whole ecosystem of housing, this is what we learn that we have to provide. So we have been providing houses throughout the 50 years, but it has generated, a large-scale segregation. So right now, our cities are largely segregated.
And presumably, the kind of advice you're giving depends so much on where you are in the world. I mean, just thinking about here in Paris, the latest urbanisation is about putting in more trees, it's about putting in cycle lanes, whereas in places like Africa, it's about ensuring there's enough housing for people to live in, presumably, that kind of...
Yeah, for sure. And then since you talked about Africa, so right now we have more than 50%, about 50% of the population living in cities in the world. In 2050, we're going to have 70%. And this growth will happen particularly in Africa and in Southeast Asia, meaning that hundreds of millions, about 1 billion people will arrive in cities in these places. Africa today, in the average, 50% of the cities are slums. So they are facing huge infrastructure gaps, and they will receive this influx of population. And young people, differently than the other parts of the world, we're talking about young people coming to cities, looking for jobs, but also ready to work. So it's a critical part of the labor force that globally will be concentrated there. They need shelter, they need integration. We're talking about countries that are going through process of industrialization, agribusiness, they're looking for economic development, overcoming many crises that's affecting many countries there. If the urban infrastructure is not there, you will not have the economies of agglomeration that you need for economic development.
So what kind of specific advice are you able to give towns and cities?
Yeah, I think one critical issue is to look at the emergency. So what's urgent? I spoke about 1 billion people living in informal settlements. This is not acceptable. We cannot have another generation of kids being born in slums. So we need to look at the situation of informal settlements of vulnerable territories with urgency. They are the ones mostly affected by all the climate events, by all the crises that we are facing right now. So this we have to look. And then within that, we have women, of course, right? And there are groups of people that are even extra vulnerable and marginalized. The second aspect is to look at the system. So what we need, Stuart, is systemic changes. We don't need more housing projects here and there. Of course, we need those at scale, but we need to look at the systems and make the systems work for continuous change. It's important that we have national policies, that we put housing at the center of the development agenda nationally at countries, that we look at domestic finance. What kind of resources can be leveraged? And there are amazing examples. Kenya is leveraging domestic resources to solve the housing problem, right? So this is possible. So make sure that we have the finances right, that we have the laws right, the regulations right, that are context-oriented, considering that we are talking about realities, lack of capacity, different institutional arrangements, etc. And then at the local level, cities must plan for housing. Look at the future. What are the demographic changes? How people are going to live in the future? They're not live like our grandparents lived, right? Yeah. So we have to understand what will be the way of life in the future and be prepared for this influx. So work at land, work at city planning, combining these two systems, the national and the local.
And bearing in mind the urgency of the situation, is it possible, realistically, with the amount of money available in the world, to do that in a sustainable environmental way?
I think it is possible. I think it's possible. We have to look at some principles. For example, I mentioned before urban sprawl. We need to avoid that. But then if you look at cities, you see a lot of vacant, underutilized spaces that we could maximize. Potential for densification, for example. So there's a cultural shift that's required here. And if we are able to have more compact cities, which is stated at the new urban agenda that actually guides our work, we'll be able to minimize the impact in terms of building infrastructure, emissions, and of course, the pressure around the natural surroundings, water sources, biodiversity, food security, etc. So this is one important aspect. The second aspect is that what I see is that countries are ready to look at internal resources and internal capacities. What they're asking is for us to build capacity, to work with them, to leave a legacy behind. And there is will.
We've got 30 seconds left. I just want to ask you, are you optimistic? I mean, bearing in mind all those difficulties you've already announced and the way the population is going, is there really a way to control this problem and to sort it out?
Stuart, if I wouldn't be optimistic, I wouldn't be here. So I'm here because I believe there's a way out. And what I see is that a growing awareness of the importance of cities, of urbanization, of housing as more relevant for the development agenda, and also political will. At our UN Habitat Assembly, where we just approved our new strategic plan by 105 countries that attended our UN Habitat Assembly, agreeing by consensus among these 105 countries that housing is a critical issue, that we have to prioritize access to housing, land, basic services, the informal settlements. We had more than 50 ministers present, 30 from Africa. There's political will. The African Union is recognizing, the European Union is recognizing, so it is there.
I'm sure seeing your enthusiasm, we'll get there. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us today. Anacláudia Rossbach, Executive Director of UN Habitat. Thanks once again
Thank you,
for today's perspective.